From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Washington, D.C. studios to our TV audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Anne Marie Horder.
A contentious day in court. Former President Donald Trump takes the witness stand in his New York civil fraud trial, railing against the judge and the prosecutor and Attorney General Letitia James. We'll break down what we heard with law professor Jessica Roth.
Trailing in 5 battleground states, President Biden's showing in a new New York Times poll has him behind Trump on most of the big issues: the economy, immigration, and foreign policy.
And speaking of, CIA Director William Burns becomes the latest to visit Israel as the death toll in Gaza climbs and the U.S. continues to push for humanitarian pauses in fighting with Hamas.
We'll speak with World Food Program Executive Director Cindy McCain and former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Cohen this hour. Kaylee, I'm really looking forward to that conversation with Cindy McCain. She just left the Rafah border crossing in Egypt, so she has a firsthand of experience. She's been sitting down with Sisi, Mohammed bin Zayed, of what's happening in the Gulf. But obviously, first time we are seeing the former President Trump testify. Amongst all of these legal troubles, he actually took the stand today because this is a civil trial.
He did, and he was asked questions that he didn't really necessarily answer yes or no, as maybe was prompted. He was reprimanded by the judge on multiple occasions and, of course, was saying essentially that the entire trial, which is him being on trial for fraud, is a fraud in and of itself. And, of course, we heard from the former president outside the courthouse when things wrapped up today. This is what he had to say about how things went.
It's a case that should have never been brought. It's a case that should be dismissed immediately. The fraud was on behalf of the court. The court was the fraudster in this case. They made references to assets that were very valuable, and they said they had no idea. They had no idea what the numbers were when they said $18 million for Mar-a-Lago, and it's 50 to 100 times that amount by any estimation.
All right, the former president there. And then, Kaylee, we also heard from the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. Yes. She came out right after the president spoke, and she also wanted to brief reporters. Take a listen.
He rambled. He hurled insults. But we expected that. At the end of the day, the documentary evidence demonstrated that, in fact, he falsely inflated his assets to basically enrich himself and his family. He continued to persistently engage in fraud. The numbers don't lie. And Mr. Trump obviously can engage in all of these distractions. And that is exactly what he did, what he committed on the stand today.
All right, so that's the word from the two sides. Let's now get an objective third opinion and go to Jessica Roth, law professor at Cardozo Law School. She is a former federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York. Professor, thank you very much for being with us this evening. Just your initial take, please, on the performance of the former president today. Did he do himself any favors with this testimony?
I don't think he did himself any favors in terms of how he fares in the outcome of this legal proceeding. Whether he did himself any favors in politics is a question that's not for me to opine on. But I was really struck by the amount of time that he spent really sort of taking on the case as a political matter, directly confronting the attorney general and even pointing to her apparently at times, taking on the judge and saying the judge was unfair, as opposed to engaging with the merits of the case. So that was very unusual, to say the least, and also very unwise tactically, because he was really antagonizing the judge, who alone is going to be making decisions in this case about what the proper remedy should be. The judge has already found in a partial summary judgment decision before the trial started that Trump and the other defendants are liable on the first cause of action of persistent fraud. And so really what remains to be decided is the amount of disgorgement of profits, and also what the remedy should be in terms of perhaps permanently enjoining Trump and his family members from doing business in the state of New York. And so if one person is in charge of making those decisions, it's really foolhardy to antagonize that person, the judge, by taking him on in such a repeatedly sort of personal attack. But again, I think that the former president probably had his eye on politics rather than the outcome first and foremost.
There really was, Professor, a very testy exchange. At one point, the judge said to the former president's attorney, please explain to him the rules. And the attorney shot back, quote, the former and soon-to-be chief executive of the United States understands the rules. And the judge said, but he doesn't abide by them. Do you think this acrimony can actually impact the case?
The only way in which it could potentially impact the case that Trump's lawyers may be thinking about strategically from their point of view is to try to create a record on appeal about the judge being biased against Trump. So to the extent that this acrimony was intentional and strategic, it would be to try to provoke the judge to act in a way that would be suggestive of bias toward Trump. And I think that this morning, we saw the judge at times cutting off Mr. Trump and even suggesting that he would limit his testimony and preclude him from testifying further and draw an adverse inference against Trump because of the way in which he was being so uncooperative answering the questions. There was a break at that point, and then going forward when they resumed, the judge permitted Mr. Trump to answer his questions in his sort of long-winded way and didn't interject nearly as much, following, I think, the lead of the state's attorney, assistant attorney general who's conducting the questioning, who seemed perfectly happy to let Mr. Trump just go on at some length and not limit his answers to sort of yes and no. So I think that initially it maybe the judge was perhaps going down the road of being provoked and then just sort of dialed it back. And so at this point, I really just don't see any basis for Trump to argue on appeal that the judge has been biased. But the antagonistic behavior may have been strategic to try to set up that issue on appeal.
Well, and of course, this isn't the only judge he is accused of being biased. I could say the same thing about Tanya Chutkan, who, of course, is overseeing the criminal case here in Washington in relation to efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election, which, Jessica, just speaks to the point that while this is one civil case, he is facing a number of others, both civil and criminal. And I just wonder what we can expect, given what's happening in the courtroom in New York today and through the remainder of the week. Ivanka Trump also will be testifying on Wednesday. Is there any translation to those other cases? Should we expect him to be taking the stand in a similar way?
It will be very interesting to see how those other trials unfold if they take place. At this point, his lawyers are trying to delay them pretty much in every court until after the election. I don't think Trump is doing very well as a witness. In terms of the impact on the case. He's actually made some concessions that I think are damaging to him. He's essentially admitted to having played a role in altering the assessments, the valuations on the financial statements, which I think will ultimately come back to haunt him in terms of a finding about his involvement and level of intent. So I don't think he's a very good witness. He doesn't seem to be well prepared. He's not disciplined. And to the extent that anything he's now said under oath could be shown to have been false, he could be setting himself up for an additional possible penalty of perjury prosecution. So I think his lawyers and his criminal lawyers are in the courtroom watching, apparently. I think they're going to be taking note and most likely I would imagine, counseling him not to take the stand in a criminal case, where, of course, he has his liberty on the line, not just his finances, his money, and his ability to do business. But ultimately, it is a criminal defendant's right to testify in their own defense. So he would have to agree with their counsel. And it's going to be difficult to imagine what that conversation looks like.
Oh, certainly is. Professor Jessica Roth, thank you so much for your time today. And we'll, of course, be checking in with you as the former president faces a slew of legal issues. Coming up in the program, former Secretary of Defense William Cohen will be with us discussing what's going on in Israel. That's next right here on Balance of Power.
We've engaged the Israelis on steps that they can take to minimize civilian casualties. We're working, as I said, very aggressively on getting more humanitarian assistance into Gaza, and we have very concrete ways of doing that. And I think you'll see in the days ahead that assistance can expand in significant ways so that more gets into people who need it and gets to the people who need it, as well as making sure that people can continue to come out of Gaza.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking with reporters in Turkey earlier today after meeting with a host of Middle Eastern leaders as the war between Israel and Hamas enters a new phase. Joining us now to discuss that is William Cohen, former U.S. Secretary of Defense and founder, chairman, and CEO of the Cohen Group. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for your time this evening. Both the Secretary of State and President Biden himself, we understand on a phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu today, is pushing for a humanitarian pause in the fighting, or a tactical pause, I guess they may now be calling it. What real leverage does the U.S. have in making that request? And with that answer in mind, is that something we're likely to see?
Well, I'm not sure we have that leverage. President Biden gave the so-called bear hug, or received a bear hug from Prime Minister Netanyahu. And there were some people who were concerned that he, and giving him a bear hug, had put handcuffs on Prime Minister Netanyahu. I think it's just the other way around. I think Bibi Netanyahu said, I'm putting handcuffs on the United States and President Biden because of the strong support Israel has in this country and in this Congress. So I think we can try to influence the opinions and the policies of Israel, but I think we're in not a very strong position to dictate how they carry out this mission. So I think what Secretary of State is doing is saying, look, we support you in trying to go after and take out Hamas's leadership and their infrastructure, but do it in a smart way. Do it in a way that Tom Friedman would say, what happens the day after comes? And there has to be a policy and a diplomatic element to this. Otherwise, we're just going to be killing not only Hamas, but a lot of tens of thousands of innocent civilians. And that simply doesn't work in the favor of the Israelis.
Well, isn't that why you have Secretary of State Antony Blinken not just going to Israel, but, of course, meeting with Mahmoud Abbas in the West Bank? He went to Iraq. He went to Turkey. And then today, we have CIA Director Bill Burns in Israel. What is the approach of sending both of the president's top diplomats?
Well, it's important that we maintain our intelligence relationship with the Israelis. They are depending upon us to provide them with information. We're not only technology in terms of weapon system, but the technology from our cyber capability and our satellite capability. So having the director of the CIA there, as well as the Secretary of State, it's really important to say, how is this looking from the air and on the ground for Israel's security? And I think what they're doing, what Secretary Blinken's doing, was to go to all of the Arab countries, because their street is important as well. And if they have thousands and tens of thousands of pro-Palestinian supporters taking to their streets, that can create a problem and set off the tinderbox that's there. So I think he's trying to make sure that he touches base with all of those who have a stake in peace and stability in the region, and make sure that he has that line of communication on all the time. Because, again, Israel lives in a very dangerous region. And to the extent they carry out this mission in the way they're carrying it out, saying we have to get Hamas and take them down, you have to do it in a way that doesn't alienate the entire region, which can then pose a significant threat, with Iran getting involved and setting Hezbollah off on the northern part of Israel, and getting Iran involved in Syria, and having their forces up there. It can be a much more complicated military operation unless Bibi Netanyahu takes measures to say, okay, how do we work with the United States? We're carrying out the mission. This is ours to decide. But I have to take into account what the U.S. thinks about it, since we are the principal supporter of Israel and always have been.
Well, Mr. Secretary, as you talk about how Israel needs to go about this essentially carefully, to paraphrase your words, how close is Israel, is the IDF, to crossing that line here? As we're looking at death tolls, is what's reported by authorities in Gaza, that's now around 10,000.
Right. Well, I think the more that the public sees this war being waged, and this is something that's really quite unusual. We haven't really seen war being waged up close on a minute by minute basis in the past for most of the campaigns we've seen. So when people see the actual horror of war, they are appalled by it. They want to pull back. The Israelis are not going to pull back. They feel this is maybe the last chance they have to really go after Hamas in a forceful way. And what President Biden said during his trip, said, okay, we understand that, but learn from our mistakes. Anger blows out the lamp of the mind. You are angry and rightfully angry, but make sure you take action which is consistent with humanitarian issues, with the rules of war as such, and so that you have the public, not only your public on your side, but the world public on your side, saying you have been the one who've been attacked. You are the ones who suffered an unprecedented attack on your country, and now we understand why you're going after Hamas. But you have to do it with a policy of saying, who are we going to turn to in the future? We have to have a two-state solution. We have urged that upon the Israelis from forever almost, but they have resisted it. Bibi Netanyahu has resisted it. And so you have to have a diplomatic policy alternative here to say, who do we empower to take over after the Israelis take out Hamas? Is Israel going to take and occupy Gaza? I don't think so. Are they going to take and occupy the West Bank? I don't think they're going to be able to do that without the world coming down on them. So do it smartly. We know you've got to carry out the mission, but make sure you try to minimize innocent people. Don't call it collateral damage. Innocent people die in wars, and you have to take as much care as you can, consistent with going after Hamas. And if you do that, you will continue to have, obviously, U.S. support, but you'll continue to have the support of other nations in the region, which becomes important the day after the day after.
Well, when you're looking at the day after, what is the solution? Obviously, Israel, the United States, regional players are not going to accept Hamas running Gaza. Israel does not want to reoccupy it, and a lot of neighbors don't want to see them reoccupy it. Do you see some sort of Arab group coming in alongside the United States?
There may be some coalition of forces that the Israelis can accept or will accept, but this comes back to the two-state solution. You have to go after the Palestinian Authority and really empower them. They have to be empowered so that the Palestinian people say, this is real this time. We're going to have the Arab countries in the region put real money into the Palestinian Authority. You're going to have new leadership in the Palestinian Authority. And if that takes place and you start to build prosperity and give the Palestinians the hope, if their lives will be better in the future, because if people have no hope, they have nothing to lose. And so we want people to have hope. We want them to have a good life. And we have to take steps to make sure that happens. And that means giving the Palestinians an opportunity to have self-governance, to have their own state, living in peace with Israel. There are two fundamental rules. Israel will never be at peace in the region as long as they are not recognized by the Arab countries as the real legitimate Jewish state in the region. And the Palestinians will never have an opportunity to participate in peace unless they have an infusion of authority and also capability to govern themselves in peace. So those are the two things. You have to recognize Israel, but you have to recognize the Palestinians to say they have to have an opportunity to have the same kind of peace and prosperity that the Israelis have had for the past 40 plus years.
Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for your time and insight this evening. Of course, former Defense Secretary William Cohen there. Coming up, more on the war between Israel and Hamas, and just 1 year left to the presidential election. This is Bloomberg.
One of the common denominators that I've heard throughout this trip is the imperative of American engagement, American leadership. Every country I talk to is looking for us to play a leading role with our diplomacy to try to make progress on all of these different aspects of the crisis.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken discussing the role of America on the world stage as he meets with world leaders about the war between Israel and Hamas. Joining us now are Bloomberg's Megan Scully and Nick Wadhams. They're around the table for our panel this evening. Nick, just to begin with you, we, of course, saw Blinken in the region again over the weekend, and we know that earlier today, President Biden spoke on the phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, talking about the idea of tactical pauses. But beyond saying it was discussed, it doesn't seem that anything was agreed. And I just wonder if these U.S. calls are being heeded at all by Israel.
Well, I mean, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes, obviously, but certainly from a public perspective, it really looks like Israel is essentially not listening to the United States. Tony Blinken was in the region. President Biden speaks with Prime Minister Netanyahu and says, listen, we are not asking for a ceasefire. We are asking for brief pauses so that aid can continue to flow into the Gaza Strip and so that people can leave, foreigners especially can leave. And so far, what it looks like is Israel is just saying, absolutely not. We have encircled Gaza City, and we are determined to go in, and we are just not going to do it. So bit of a bad look for Secretary Blinken when he went in. This was essentially his top goal when he was in the region, and he didn't get it.
Well, I was at the White House today, and on my walk in, the White House, some of the structures were covered with handprints in red paint. As you could see it now, is the picture I took earlier this morning. I believe they were taking it down. Free Palestine. Ton of blowback, Nick, on this administration, because every single day the tally of civilians is going up, especially children. At what point is that pressure really going to get exerted on Tel Aviv?
Well, I mean, again, I think the Biden administration strategy here was, hey, big, warm embrace of Netanyahu at the beginning, and then that would give them the space behind the scenes to be able to say, okay, listen, you need to ease off. But obviously what we're seeing now is that Netanyahu, the Israeli Defense Forces, are essentially saying, no, we are not going to do that. We have to go in. This was our 9/11. You don't get it. The problem is that the blowback Biden and Blinken are getting both in the Arab world, but also at home, are turning into a major liability for them, particularly as the death toll continues to rise. So, you know, this is really something that they have not worked out, and we're just going to have to see how it unfolds.
So to Nick's point, Megan, this is an issue abroad, but it also is an issue at home, and it's an issue on Capitol Hill as well. By and large, there is bipartisan support for Israel in Congress. There's just not really clarity on how that support should be delivered, I think is fair to say. There needs to be something reconciled between how the House would like to see this funding go through and how the Senate would like to. Are we going to see real progress on that this week, anytime soon, given this is a hot conflict ongoing as we speak?
I think we're going to see a lot of starts and stops this week. We have the House passed bill, which is Israel aid exclusively, and which the White House has threatened to veto because it would pay for it by taking money out of the IRS budget, $14 billion to be exact. So then you have the Senate working on a much larger package, a package that also includes Ukraine money, includes border, and then undergirding all of this is ongoing negotiations about government spending. Remember, we're about 11 days out from a threatened government shutdown. So that is also part of these larger negotiations. The bills at this point are all separate, but I would not be surprised if we saw some combining just to get them through one or both chambers.
What is your team hearing right now? Do you think Israel will get done before a potential government shutdown? Is that even possible?
It's certainly possible. The House passed its bill, but I would say it's unlikely at this point. It takes about a week for any piece of legislation to make its way through the Senate, and Senate Democrats are not going to go along with what the House passed because of this IRS funding and because of the White House veto threat.
Well, on the subject of the White House, let's talk about who's going to be sitting in it come, I don't know, a year and 2 months from now, right? That's where we are. There was a poll that made a lot of noise over the weekend. New York Times, Siena, that looked at key swing states, honestly pretty similar to the poll that Bloomberg did with Maureen Consult a few weeks ago. But, Megan, the gist of it is that in 5 of these really critical states, it is former President Trump that is leading Biden. Voters have issues on the economy, on the former president's age. He's losing support with Black, Hispanic, and young voters, it seems. And now there's even calls from Democratic strategists like Axelrod basically saying that Biden needs to not be the one who runs for the Democratic nomination. Is there a real likelihood that it's not going to be him?
Not that we're seeing so far, but the poll was pretty staggering, as was the Bloomberg poll last week. Some of the things that stood out for me in this New York Times poll, 22% of Black voters would support Donald Trump. Then you also have all of these legal cases that the former president is sitting through, and including today a pretty astonishing testimony in his civil fraud trial in New York. And still he's amassing all of this support. What we're also going to see if these polls are correct, and we certainly know from 2016 that polls aren't always correct, especially this far out, but there could be some real down ballot repercussions as well. All of these states are swing states. They all have competitive Senate races in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Arizona, and we could see the Senate also switch. The hope was among Democrats that with Biden at the top of the ticket, he could bring these swing states. And what these polls are showing us is that is not the case.
When you look at foreign policy into these polls, former president is actually scoring better points than Joe Biden at this moment. What does that say to you, especially as Biden is about to sit down with Xi Jinping at this moment? Is he going to get a lot of blowback for that?
Well, this is a constant challenge for the Democrats and for Biden, especially because what you see in these polls is a sense that former President Trump was just tougher with foreign leaders. You know, they'll say, oh, there were no wars under Donald Trump. You know, Putin was too afraid to go after Ukraine. You didn't see this kind of violence against Hamas and by Hamas into Israel. So there's this sort of toughness factor. The question for President Biden is, well, then what does that cause him to do with Xi Jinping? And the fear among folks who believe there should be some form of not accommodation, but at least coexistence between the U.S. and China is that this toughness element, the pressure on him to be the tough guy, is really only going to force him to harden his line against Xi Jinping if they do end up meeting next month in San Francisco, as we expect.
All right. Bloomberg's Megan Scully and Nick Wadhams, thank you both so much for wrapping up top stories of the day. We want to bring in now Cindy McCain. She's executive director of the World Food Program. Cindy, thank you so much for joining us. You just got back from Egypt. You were at the Rafah border crossing, and you said here the suffering just meters away is unfathomable, standing on this side of the border. What can you tell us about the humanitarian aid that is not getting into Gaza?
Well, we need to get our trucks in, and we can't do that unless we can be guaranteed safe and unfettered access. So that's why I was in Egypt, to talk to the president and the powers that be in Egypt to make sure that we can do just that. Without this food, people are going to starve to death. And that's simply the bottom line. The border crossing is chaotic, as you can imagine. And without the ability to get our trucks in, we simply can't get the job done. And as I said, people, primarily women and children, who always take the brunt of this, are going to die.
Where is the biggest issue, Cindy, in terms of actually getting the truck in? Where in the line of command, or what countries are holding things back? What's the roadblock?
Well, I can speak to the Egyptian side, and it's been the Egyptian Red Crescent is on the border. They're running the operation, understandably, of course, and we are there. Once we get set up to work there, we will be supporting them. But in the meantime, we're just not getting enough trucks in. A few trucks this day, a few trucks that day, then they shut the border down. It's all very chaotic, and it's also very complicated because of the inspection process as well. We need it to streamline, and we need to get in there as quickly as possible.
President Biden discussed the possibility of a tactical pause with Benjamin Netanyahu today. If there was to be a pause, do you imagine this would help streamline humanitarian aid getting to civilians in Gaza?
Listen, we will take anything we can get to be able to get our trucks in, no matter what you want to call it. The issue now is that there's no water, there's no food, there's no medicine, there's no fuel. We all know that. People are dying in there. And so it's up to us to put the pressure on to make sure that our humanitarian agencies can get in there and get in there safely also. But with that said, we cannot forget all of the other crises that are going on in the world right now that are simply not on the front pages that we also have to contend with.
Absolutely, and that's important to keep in mind as we look at one area of conflict. There are many others around the world who may not be getting the attention that they deserve, just given the way that news is flowing. To go back to what Anne-Marie was just talking about, though, this idea that the administration is at least messaging to Israel, you need to allow space for humanitarian aid to get in. Other than saying things like that, is there a more active role you would like to see the administration taking? What would your ask of them be in this moment?
Well, my ask is of the administration and everyone above. Please, we need unfettered access, and please, please, sooner than later. We've been waiting a long time, and our trucks, as you know, we've had food backed up at the border gates. We've had trucks that have been mispacked and everything else. We need an organized process, which WFP is very good at and can assist the Egyptian Red Cross to do just that. And that way we can get them in much faster and prioritized in a way that will help do the most good.
You were in Egypt, you met El-Sisi, you also were in UAE at one point, you sat down with Mohammed bin Zayed. How do you see these regional players facilitating what you're trying to get done?
Oh, they're all very helpful. I haven't talked to any of them that were not helpful and thoughtful about all this, and they understand the absolute crisis that this area is in. But therein lies again. It's still been very slow. So I'm looking to all of the people that out there, all of our politicians, all of our leaders, all of our secretaries, our ministers, et cetera, to please help get our humanitarian supplies in across the border and into Gaza.
Do you find Israel has also been helpful?
We do talk to Israel, yes, we do, and so we're working. We've had an office for a while in Israel, as you know, and so we have someone that's talking to the Israeli government on a daily basis.
On the subject of the Israeli government and their handling of this conflict thus far, as you travel and speak to all these different people, as you witness what is or is not getting through in terms of aid to Gaza, do you sense that there is a sentiment shift looming in terms of support for Israel's effort to destroy Hamas?
I don't know about that. I can only speak to the crisis that is right now happening on the border. My job is not to decide who's doing what and when. My job is to get the food and the assistance in. And that's what we plan and try to map out each day on a daily basis to make sure we can do that. But it's not fast enough, and the process is too bulky. We need to move in a much quicker way and a much leaner process to be able to do the most good.
I want to ask you about what is happening on the international stage. Given how President Biden is doing with multiple conflicts, as you said, I mean, I know you recently were talking about Chad, what's going on in Sudan, what's going on in Afghanistan in terms of humanitarian aid needing to get there. This administration has said from the very beginning they wanted to put human rights at the forefront and the bedrock of their foreign policy. Do you see that happening when you travel the world?
I see the effects of our government, along with many other governments at bay, as I travel around. It's very important that we remember, if we don't allow food and resources to get into so many of these countries, we're going to wind up fighting them unless we feed them. And so the most important thing that we can do is make sure that we can do our very best to make sure, especially women and children, are safely and securely in place, and also being given the most resources in terms of food and water and shelter as well along the way. But the world is very complicated right now. If you look to the Sahel and then look into Sudan and then look into Somalia, Yemen, I mean, I can keep the list going. It's a very dicey time, and we need to pay very close attention to those countries that are not on the front page right now.
So you say it's a dicey time in the world, and yet, as we were just discussing with our reporters here, I'm not sure how much of the conversation you heard, but we were discussing polling which shows that former President Donald Trump is leading Biden in a number of states that could decide the result of 2024 and who ultimately is going to be sitting in the White House come January of 2025. Former President Trump was an isolationist in a way that President Biden is not. When you see polling like that, how concerned are you in terms of thinking about the U.S.'s role as either an isolationist power or a globalist one?
I don't follow the polls. I, on a daily basis, just pray that we can get food and our resources back into these countries that we need to be in, and make sure that we have enough money to do so, by the way. Money is short right now, and so we're appealing to the world community to please help us and help other organizations as well to be able to do the job that we need to be doing right now.
If you don't follow the polls, though, I want to just bring in one tidbit of it. The former president is winning in 5 of the key swing states, or 5 out of the 6 key swing states that the New York Times Siena College poll ended up talking to voters. And in one of those areas is in foreign policy. How would this look like in November of next year if the former president were to win?
Well, nothing's going to look good unless we can feed people. And starvation is looming around the globe. So whoever winds up winning this, I know should pay very close attention to what is going on in the world and make sure that we can feed people around the world.
All right, Cindy McCain, we thank you so much for joining us this evening, of course, director of the World Food Program, and again, just back from the border in the Rafah crossing in Egypt. We really appreciate your time. Now, coming up, we'll turn back to domestic affairs. It is Election Day tomorrow, and even though it's still an off year, there are a lot of races we need to pay attention to. We'll look at some of those highlights next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV. Now, tomorrow marks Election Day during an off-cycle year, but there's still some closely watched races. Tyler Kendall has more on one that's considered a bellwether. Hey, Tyler.
Anne-Marie, one election is putting abortion on the ballot with both parties watching for a gauge ahead of 2024. Voters in Ohio will decide what's known as Issue 1. If approved, the initiative would enshrine abortion rights into the state constitution. I caught up with Ohio's Democratic Senator Sherrod Brown about why he's voting in support.
It's really simple. Issue 1, do we trust women and their doctors to make the decision about a woman's health, or do we trust politicians in Columbus? That's why I vote yes. It's simple. It's clearly the majority of Ohio, the majority of the American public thinks that.
An Ohio law banning abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy has been blocked by the courts for now. If Issue 1 is approved, abortion would be allowed up to fetal viability, and even after that in some cases. Opponents say that goes too far and are raising concerns about limits on access. Here's Ohio's other senator, Republican J.D. Vance, after he cast his ballot during early voting.
I just voted, and I voted no on Issue 1. Really, the question is, do we want unlimited abortion up to the moment of birth? The answer is no. Do we want to block parents from participating in the health care decisions of their kids? The answer is no, and the way to make that happen is to vote no on Issue 1.
Since last year's Supreme Court reversal of Roe v. Wade, 6 states have gone to the polls to decide abortion access, and each time voters have protected abortion rights. It's becoming a top issue for 2024. A growing number of states will likely see abortion on the ballot next year. It's also expected to be a top issue impacting candidates. The most recent polling in Ohio, which former President Trump won twice, shows 58% of voters are in favor of enshrining abortion rights. Either way, the resources are pouring in. According to data from Ad Impact, tomorrow's election has seen more than $40 million in combined spending. Anne-Marie, we should note Michael Bloomberg, the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, the parent of Bloomberg TV, gave $1 million to the campaign supporting Issue 1.
Tyler, there's also another race being deemed a bellwether tomorrow for Kentucky's governor. Why is this gaining such national attention?
Well, this race is really heating up. The most recent polling shows us that incumbent Democratic Governor Andy Beshear is now polling even with his Republican challenger, Daniel Cameron. He's the Attorney General. This is a red state with a blue governor. Anne-Marie, as you'll recall, former President Trump won this state by 26 percentage points in 2020. So strategists on both sides of the aisle say that they are going to be watching this race to see what's resonating with voters and what issues they should be paying attention to. Whether that's the economy or abortion.
Yeah, and it's a dead heat. All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, thank you so much for bringing us that important issue. For more on what to expect from Election Day tomorrow, let's bring in our political panel. Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, and Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. Thank you both for joining us in New York. All right, Rick, I want to start with you on what is going on in terms of Virginia, what we could see tomorrow, because Terry Haynes of Pangea Policy says ignore everything except Virginia because it can shake up the Republican presidential election. Are you still hearing whispers from people that Governor Youngkin may jump in?
Sure. I think there are a lot of people who want Governor Youngkin to jump in. I don't think Governor Youngkin has that much interest in jumping into a late presidential race, but he's getting lobbied by a lot of financial interests. in the Republican Party and a lot of operatives, some of whom are probably looking for a job, but a lot of whom think that he might be able to shake up the race. But he's got his own abortion test in Virginia. Even though it's not on the ballot, virtually every race in the metropolitan areas of Northern Virginia and Tidewater are being run on the abortion issue. And so if he wins the state legislature and he gets a majority, then he's going to have an argument to be why he's working the system and it's being successful. If he loses, there'll be a lot fewer calls for him to jump into a presidential race.
All right, so look forward to see if potentially he moves Virginia fully red or not. Jeannie, when it comes to the issue of abortion, I mean, you saw the New York Times Siena poll. The former president is doing very well against Biden in these key swing states on most issues except abortion. Is this something the campaign is just going to have to really lean into in these states?
You know, I think that's why tomorrow is so important. I think we're really going to see if abortion is as effective an issue at getting Democrats out to the polls and moderates out, independents out to the polls in the way it was in the last few special elections and in the 2022 election. And, you know, it's interesting because you and Rick were just talking about the Youngkin gubernatorial race. It's fascinating to watch what Youngkin has been able to do, and I've been watching it closely. He has tried to change the language and give Republicans a way to move forward on abortion by talking about it not as a ban, but as a limit. He's not been as defensive as other Republicans have been in other places since the Dobbs decision. If he does well tomorrow, or if the legislature, the Republicans do well, you're going to see them adopt that across the country. But you look at the Ohio referendum, and you can see the arguments there. You can see on the one hand, people against abortion talking about this as a path towards, you know, late-term abortions, and people in favor of abortion or the right to choose talking about it as women's health. So if it is important and it does get people out, this is a real precursor for what we might see. And sure, the Biden campaign is watching very, very closely to see if they can use it to get these all-important constituencies, young women, suburban, out to the polls come next year.
Well, they're going to need to, Jeannie. If the election was held today, it looks like the former president would win. This is what David Axelrod had to put on Twitter following this New York Times poll. Only Joe Biden can make this decision. If he continues to run, he will be the nominee of the Democratic Party. What he needs to decide is whether that is wise, whether it's in his best interest or the country's. Jeannie, how should the Biden campaign be looking at this poll, which is very similar, I should add, to the Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll in these key swing states?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm so glad you raised the Bloomberg Morning Consult poll because it came first and it is showing very, very similar results. Look, this race is going to be decided by 100,000 plus or minus people in 4 to 5 states. The campaign knows that. If Joe Biden decides to stay in the race, he will be the nominee. And then they are going to try to use issues like abortion to get people out. And they are going to try to make this a very stark choice. Just look at what we've been hearing in the last 24 hours. The article in the Washington Post, for instance, about Donald Trump's very, very severe language about what he intends to do should he be elected. They're going to be focusing on things like that and hoping that gets out enough moderates in those states that he can pull this off. Either way, it's going to be very tight. And these polls, Bloomberg and now the New York Times Siena, very, very concerning for Democrats, and they should be. It is a very, very difficult time.
All right, our political panel stays with us. Coming up, we'll be back to discuss the latest on the $14.3 billion Israeli aid package passed by the House and more. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg.
I think that the next year, with the challenges, because this is the year of your elections, now again we see the critical situation in the Middle East. So I think your help is very important for the next year, and that is crucial.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Meet the Press over the weekend. Let's bring in back our closers, Rick Davis and Jeannie Sheehan-Zaino. Thank you both for joining us. So, Rick, we do know that House Republicans were able to get through the Israel-only bill. At the same time, the President of the United States was asking for other national security partners' aid to them, including Ukraine. You just heard from Volodymyr Zelensky, also Taiwan, and also money for the southern border. All of this as we face a government shutdown potentially starting midnight of next Friday. So into Saturday. Do you see this happening in this Congress?
Yeah, I think you'll get these different items passed in this Congress. I'm not sure you're going to get it the way the president wanted it, which was all bundled together in one form. Certainly the Senate is in the process of working on their own version of a bundled bill that would give funding to Ukraine and to Israel. And they're running into some issues with what to put in it as far as what does that funding pay for. But the bottom line is I think you will get all these things funded in the course of this Congress. It's just a matter of whether it gets done before the government shutdown funding gets done or not. If it's not, then it's going to depend upon whether or not Republicans and Democrats are coming together to just do a CR, which actually is the easier, quicker way to get it done, or if they start loading up all these different things like laddered CRs and stuff like that, which most people don't even know what it means, but it means delays and government shutdown. So as long as the government doesn't shut down, this business can still get done.
Rick, Volodymyr Zelensky is not shy about the fact that he thinks what's going on in the Middle East is taking away from the crisis in Ukraine. Is that potentially making it much harder for Republicans to sign on to aid to Kyiv?
I think the Republicans that are resistant to sign on to aid to Kyiv were there already, right? I don't think it's actually distracted anybody else, but it's certainly taken him out of the front page of the newspapers every day. And that's, I think, why he did the speech he did and trying to sort of fight his way back into the consciousness of the Congress, because he's got very strong defenders there, and they'll be able to carry the day ultimately. But I don't think that Israel and the war going on in the Gaza right now has actually changed people's minds. It's just taken the emphasis off of the Ukraine.
Judy, when it comes to what is going on in Israel, their offensive on Hamas, which you see the death toll of Palestinians rise every single day. Thousands protested in Washington, D.C., outside the White House, including graffiti on White House property. How difficult of a position is it for the Biden administration, especially with progressive Democrats?
It is a difficult position. And, I think the White House has done a very good job. I give Antony Blinken high marks for what he's been trying to do over the last several weeks on behalf of the administration and the president himself. The reality is, as we think about this funding, and Democrats and Republicans are pretty close, about $14 billion on what they want to spend. My view is, and what I would urge the president to do, would be to make sure that that is conditional. And I'm not talking about the IRS agents or anything like that. I am talking about no more settlements being built and working towards a two-state solution and keeping the humanitarian issue and the issue of these hostages front of mind. I mean, you just had that great interview with Cindy McCain. There is a humanitarian crisis going on, and that is what is getting people out on the streets, and rightly so. So they have to keep that in mind. If we're going to use tax money, that crisis has got to be front and center.
Yeah, horrific humanitarian crisis unfolding. Rick Davis, Jeannie Shanzano, thank you both for joining me this evening. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the Terminal Online for more of these stories. We'll see you here tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.